to kick this off. Welcome to One Museum, One Book, and our conversation about Tightrope, which I'm really excited that we're going to have an in-depth conversation about this book in advance of our authors speaking about it on Thursday. So if those of you that don't know me, I'm Marcy Larson. I'm the VP of Marketing and Business Development at Illinois Holocaust Museum. And on behalf of our CEO, Susan Abrams, and our board of directors, our volunteers and staff, we would very much like to thank you for registering and attending this One Book, One Museum, One Book discussion of Tightrope. We are joined today with our moderator, Barbara Jo Scott, who has been a docent with the museum for the past 10 years and an avid reader her entire life. And she and I spoke earlier today, and she cannot wait to get going with a discussion of this book. Before we begin, let me share with you a little bit about the format. So Barbara Jo is going to start and give her impressions and a bit of synopsis about the book. And then she's going to lead us in discussion with some questions. If you'd like to add to the discussion, you can type something in the comments and I'll read it, or you can raise your hand and unmute yourself and participate in the conversation. We're sitting at about 35. So I do think that's a nice number to use the raise your hand. So you can physically raise your hand, or you can use at the bottom of Zoom, there's a little button you can push that raises your hand. So either way is fine. And then I will call on you and say, oh, what would you like to add to the conversation? And we'll go from there, and we'll go till about 10 to 8. I know Barbara Jo has a closing question that she would ask at that point, and look to wind this down by 8 p.m. So if anyone has any question, raise your hand. And if not, oh, Roberta, is your hand raised? If you're going to speak, we appreciate you being on mute when you're not speaking, but if you're going to speak, you need to unmute yourself.
I lost my screen. I have no picture.
Oh,
I had it, and all of a sudden I lost it. I'm trying to find it.
Well, we can see you. We're not the best at
I had it Sunday when I was, Monday night during the
yeah, we're not the best at technical support. I think the best I could offer is to go back out and come back in, and we'll let you in.
I'm not already, but no, there's something that all of a sudden it'll come back.
Okay, great. Well, with that, Barbara Jo, I'm going to kick it over to you. So welcome, and thank you for leading this discussion of Tightrope.
Oh, you're welcome. And I have to admit, this is my first public book discussion where I'm the leader. I've been in book clubs and I've run them, but not like this. So this is a first for me. We're here tonight to talk about Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn's book, Tightrope, which you've all read. They're an amazing couple. You know him from the New York Times, maybe, as an op-ed. Tightrope, America's Reaching for Hope. The authors take us on this journey across America. It starts in his hometown of Yamhill, Oregon, and he takes us across America to try to show us what is kind of invisible to some of us. But it's the disintegration or the falling apart of middle class, blue collar working America, both white and black. But he focuses more on white. He takes us on a journey through people he knows, friends he knows, and then people they know, and other people that he's been referred to through friends. While there's a lot of despair in the book, there's also hope. And there's a lot of explanation of why things are the way they are right now. In their storytelling, the authors allow us to meet people who suffer from the loss of the American dream, as well as those who overcome it or escape it. And he leaves us with a thought of, okay, and what are we going to do, if anything? What are we going to do about it? So to begin our discussion, and I hope this is a discussion, I was a teacher, social studies teacher for a long time. I can talk for a long time, but you don't want to hear me do that. It would be much better to have this be a conversation. And I think that's what their goal is, to make this a conversation, because there are no easy answers. The author uses friends, real people, personal friends that he grew up with and we're still friends with. How did that strike you? Was that an effective tool to get us immersed in this culture that we may or may not be familiar with? What do you think?
So this is Marcy. We're going to need, everyone's more than welcome to turn their video on so we can all see each other, and you can raise your hand if you'd like to participate.
Marcy, I think Leslie has his hand up.
No, Bill.
No,
Bill.
doesn't matter. Yeah, it is a pretty effective tool, because one of the dilemmas in the book is whether how much of it is personal responsibility versus how much of it is environmental responsibility.
Mhm.
And so he's talking about people he knows, and that allows him to get a sense of how much is personal and how much is environmental bad choices versus having to make so many choices that one of them is going to be bad and kill you anyway. So it kind of works for me that he's looking at people he knew and stories he knew something about, rather than some of the abstracts.
Mhm. Thank you.
Bev?
Bev, we can't
If
hear
I'm
you.
gonna-
Sorry. I think it made it more believable because he had such intimate long-term relationships with these people, and he was able to contrast his upbringing and his experiences through life and compared to what they had gone through. And I thought it was a very dramatic way of telling the story.
Anyone else?
Okay. No? Yes? No?
I don't, nope.
And feel free to pop in whenever. As he's telling the story with these friends, it occurred to me that at the beginning of the book, it almost surprised him that the kids on bus 6 had such a variety of turnouts. He turned out fine. More than fine. And so that was an interesting, I think, just from my reading of it. But I agree with you guys that it made it very believable, and it made empathy develop for me. I felt sorry for some of these people. In the book, we have 3 major themes that they write about. And the first one, is that white working class America, those communities, in the last election, they were called the deplorables, are collapsing under the weight of skilled labor loss, resulting in health insurance, pension loss, of drug abuse, obesity, early death. One of the main characters, Dee Knapp, the mom that was shot at the very beginning of the book, she never loses her hope through her entire life, through all of what she has seen. She grew up in a community that was thriving. Her father had a good job. And then she gets married, and we know how that turns out. She buries 4 of her 5 children. She's living in a trailer, but she has hope. Did that surprise anybody? What does she base that hope on? No? Okay, then let's get into some of the specifics. Why, when rural America in particular, and I was surprised when I read it. I guess I knew this from a historical point of view, but I didn't really think about it. It really wasn't until the 40s, 50s, 60s that many parts of the United States got electricity,
Yeah.
got indoor plumbing, was able to own land, was able to build a home. And then after the war, we had industrialization, we had good jobs, decent paying jobs. The one quote, if salaries had kept up with what they were in 1960, today, people would be making $40 an hour. I was really surprised when I heard that. And then, so she grows up thinking America is a wonderful place. The American dream is alive and well. And now it's not. In thinking about this, he talks about the loss, the first reason, the loss of solid blue collar jobs. Jobs that you could depend on, jobs that provided a living. What do you think? I was talking to Marcy at the beginning. I grew up in that kind of a neighborhood. Everybody, my dad was a butcher. The guy next door worked at Brock's Candy.
Yeah.
Guys got up in the morning and went off to work.
Happened to the, maybe this was just, I'm not sure what you're listening to.
I think Roberta's talking, but I don't think I can hear her.
Bev has her hand up. Hi, Bev.
Hi, I was just gonna say, right, I did too. My father worked in a factory, and our neighbors were all blue collar people, yet they all owned their own homes. And so they had progressed to that point. They were able to make the step of buying your own home, which I think is a really important step in economic development, when people actually own their own property. But I don't know why she still had hope. That was just pretty amazing to me. But maybe I'm getting her confused. I thought the Knapp, were you talking about the Knapp family?
Yes, the family that
I
he
think this
really.
is a discussion of a book that if you haven't read it, you're not gonna.
Well, that's true. Yes, well, we can, but we're using the book, hopefully, as a springboard for the bigger topics, for the bigger themes, which you can discuss without the actual book. Now, Dee, I brought her up because she was so striking to me.
So Roberta does have her hand up. Roberta, do you have something you want to say? You have to unmute yourself. There you
I
go.
didn't realize the red button wasn't showing. I think I'm probably a product of the same generation.
We turn this off.
My
You want
father,
to listen to it, it's fine.
my
No, not
father
especially.
worked, before I was born, worked his way through college. He was the first one in his family. He was the next to the youngest of 8 children. And his parents were immigrants, came in they were married in the 1880s, 1890s. And he was born in the early 1900s. He was 1910. He worked his way through college in Monteshevit's factory, cooking matzah, where he had a job because they could trace, they were landsmen, and they could trace their way back. And that's what was in the effect. Like the movie The Stripes Family, if you've seen it on Prime. But it was all family, and he got through college. We knew that all of us would go to college. My mother wasn't allowed to go to college, but her brothers did. Now, my generation in my high school, whether you went to a community equivalent of a community college, or I was lucky enough to go to a sleepaway, but you know, some people did better and some worse, but they were all working families. And as I was growing up, a lot of them were soldiers, returning soldiers, the vets, so that there was a basic something coming in, the pension or something, benefits. Even my husband, who was a Korean vet, ended up going to graduate school on a GI Bill. So it got him through his PhD. Whether we could have done it, I never thought we would be living in Florida in a large house and traveling back and forth to, well, I used to travel back and forth, but now I don't go anywhere. I sit in the house. But, you know, I mean, it sounds like, I think there's a generational thing. You have hope because everyone around you has the same. And you see that my grandfather helped start a union in a hatter's factory. So, and then my father worked in a factory in order to go to school. But then we're all professionals right up the line. And people, it's not only among our people this happened, other cultures. It's the areas of the rural did not have that. We weren't in a rural community. They didn't have the opportunities, but they had the same hope. They heard the same radio broadcast because there was no TV and it was a long time till they got the TV. But the movies were hopeful. When the war movies. So when you look at that, they survived and they got here and they're raising family. But the families before that, the immigrant families, you're talking about way back pre-depression through the depression. Listen, look at your Grapes of Wrath stories. They all had hope. I mean, it was a miserable time, but they had hope.
Lori, thank you, Roberta. That was great. Lori has her hand up. Hi, Lori.
I wanted to say that, and I will just put it out there, I'm really embarrassed to admit that I thought I grew up in certainly a nice Chicago suburban, but nothing particularly fancy. But when you read a story like this and have such a sense of, again, maybe a level of privilege that I felt this book really, we've all been, I think, really, obviously over the summer especially, and, really aware of maybe racial inequities more than I'll speak for myself, more than I ever understood it. I probably thought I understood it, but I'm learning that I really didn't. And I felt the same way reading this book. I felt like the level of poverty and the systemic, again, not unlike the racial stuff, the systemic, how they explained over and over again how the system failed people. And I felt like, again, I feel embarrassed to say that was not something I really understood. This book really completely changed my point of view and opened up, a level of awareness that I think it's very overwhelming to try to figure out how to address it. But I think the first step, I guess, is understanding it.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the
Aware
first
of it is a better way.
I'm sorry, Barbara Jo, one more person was trying to speak. Can you raise your hand so we know who it is? Next page. No? Okay. Hey, go ahead, Barbara Jo.
It's interesting because it does seem to be an overwhelming problem. And one of the things that I particularly liked about the book that they did not take sides. They just presented people and circumstance. And they gave their opinions a little bit, but they really didn't take sides. They didn't advocate one. There's enough blame to go around. And there's quite in the first part of the book where they talk about the causes. There is quite a bit of problems that need to be solved, and why the problems came about. Sometimes through neglect, but as they say, also sometimes through just plain out and out cruelty. So let's take a look at like one of them, and some from unintended consequences, I think. The loss of blue collar jobs, the loss of skilled labor jobs. The main character, or well, he's not really a main character, but the Knapp family, that dad lost he was a mason and he got replaced. The company went out of business. He became a lumberer. That didn't work either. And then he just slowly, the dominoes started to fall. There's an interesting quote, and I'd like to see if you have a reaction. In the beginning, he quotes a billionaire capitalist. And this man says, I am a capitalist, and I even think capitalism is broken. The problem is capitalists typically don't know how to divide the pie. Socialists typically don't know how to grow it very well.
Yeah, that was good.
That was great.
Yeah.
I mean, that one, I was telling Marcy, I've highlighted this book like I was still back in college, you know. But that quote really said something to me. Does it say something to anyone else?
Yeah, absolutely. He put it so plainly. It was really easy to see and understand and say, okay, I really get that picture now, because that was just a really brilliant way of putting it, I think. And why did that happen? Why did we allow that? Why have we allowed it to go on? And that book was published, I think, before Trump got into office.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about all those people now. I mean, and all their neighbors, what's happening with them now after what's going on with Trump and the pandemic? I mean, I didn't even want to go there.
You know, that I wonder if there's an audience question to that effect on Thursday night. My guess is that someone will ask that.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Jeannie, do you have your hand raised? Jeannie Topic, is that a hand raise?
She needs to unmute.
Yes, unmute.
You're here. Can I help you unmute? Maybe.
You have to send her the message to unmute. Try to
Hi.
unmute her.
Jeannie, were you trying to say something?
No, just totally in agreement with the whole process here with what the people were going through. Right on with it. All good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. The Kristofs.
Oh,
Go
let's
ahead.
let Barbara Joe, we'll get back to Roberta in a minute.
No, I was just going to agree with Barbara Joe.
Okay. Thank you.
What you said, what's going on, and what you said also, Marcy. If we look around us, we can see that capitalist versus socialist. I worked in social welfare and public health, so I saw it all through my work life. But it's been true forever. It never went away, the differences, the dichotomy. In the 60s, we were more socialistic. And once Nixon got in, we were no longer, we became very capitalistic. And you can see it by following each year. And from the 80s on, it's been, and even when the Democrats got in, it didn't change. It was still, we still were capitalists.
Right.
I mean,
Gotten them back.
does it have to be one way or the other? I guess
That was what we thought philosophically when we, in the 60s, when I got out of college. It doesn't have to, we could all live together.
Well, and I think that's one thing they point out. We did. For the 40s, 50s, and 60s, yes, unions were becoming stronger. I know some people don't like unions, but businesses were growing, but they shared. And they do a good job of pointing out, and I don't remember the statistics, I apologize for that. But the CEO's job was only 10 times more than the bottom worker. And I mean that as opposed to the hundreds of times or the exponential growth now. And with that came a shift in focus. It became a shift, and he used the Detroit 1909 or 2009 bailout. General Motors made the workers share in the profits. I mean, they were not stockholders.
Were based on that.
There were, and they had payouts, and there was a benefit to working. There was a personal benefit. You had a stake in the company. The workers wanted the company to do well, and the company respected the workers. And then that kind of eroded, and the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. And that's definitely the focus of the book. But now you throw on top of that big pharma and the opioid crisis.
And the world, it's a world economy now. Remember that.
Yes, those all come in. But if we go back to the 60s and 70s and early 80s, to when the dominoes truly start falling to the point where maybe we can't put them back. And that's the question here. Can we put them back?
There has to be a willingness.
Go ahead, Leslie. I have Leslie with a hand up. Could we go? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, some of it's, as I remember, some of it is the rural areas always, as you get the picture in this book, they always wanted to stay in the sort of jobs that they had without change. When people you talked about in New York and places like that, they wanted to move up the scale. Some of you talked about your parents wanted to go to college. I mean, I remember reading that in New York, they put these reformers in, and they adopted the work plan for their schools, which was to teach everybody vocational training and all the stuff he talks about. And the Jews of New York revolted and put Tammany Hall back in charge because they didn't want to end up as in vocational workers. They wanted a college plan. I mean, then there are things in between. There are vocations, and there are vocations, and being willing to switch vocations when the time comes.
But that becomes one of the problems that Kristof identifies, is that like when the coal jobs left, when the lumbering jobs left, when whatever the job is left, there wasn't the retraining, or there wasn't good retraining. There may have been some, but there wasn't
enough.
It wasn't nearly enough, and it wasn't quick enough. And here we get to another really good quote I had that came in the book that said, you know, liberals want to blame society and the status quo, and conservatives say it's personal responsibility. Kristof says it's both.
It is.
It is.
That
both.
was actually going to be my discussion point, which was, in this group's opinion, who should have owned the retraining? I mean, how should that have happened? And what can we learn from that today?
What year was the book?
This book?
Yeah.
2019. It's new.
No, it was.
Yeah, it just came out in paperback last week.
But what is it based on? What year?
Oh, it goes from the 50s forward.
Okay, you're speaking about a time when it was already, when in the 50s, things were already starting to fall, to get tighter. The jobs were changing, the attitudes were changing. There wasn't as much to do at the lowest level. Industry, knowledge, and we didn't train people. I know like people, the most advanced had learned computers or were beginning to data processing. And you get people who are coming out of, most factory people could be trained if they wanted to learn, but you have some of the lowest level employees who can't based by their skill and they have to be taught young to want to change, give them a change attitude so that they'll learn to learn. And this, I think, was part of what we had in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, that tri-state area, because that's where I grew up. I wasn't in the Midwest.
Mhm.
And I know things are different even now. The kids are raised with a different attitude than they are in the Midwest. Because there's more mixture now
Mhm.
because of television and because of
Mhm.
of technology.
Mhm.
But if someone was trained in the 50s, means they're going to school through the 60s. And at the end of the 60s is when it all fell down.
Right.
And in the 50s, in the 70s, we had the first recession that affected my husband and me.
Mhm. Mhm.
Never got back into research because the big pharma didn't want to, he was in a little pharma working. He worked on endo in a small farm, on warfarin, on Coumadin. Couldn't
Right.
get back into that kind of research
Right.
because,
Roberta,
yeah.
so does anyone else have a comment on retraining, job loss, the role of personal responsibility, role of government, kind of pulling on this thread and wanting to comment on that?
Oh, I think government should have done more. They should have been paying attention, but I don't think government is really set up to pay that much attention to people that are struggling. I think more attention is always paid to the communities that are, that have already moved up and are already, maybe that because they pay more taxes. I don't know what the reason is, but it seems like there's always been a prejudice or a disinterest in poor people. I think that's something that's going on, and they just maybe expected these people to figure it out for themselves where they really couldn't. I mean, if you lose your job and you get depressed and you have nothing, you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, it's just kind of a system for disaster, I think, because you just keep getting deeper and deeper into it, and then your family falls apart and you lose your home. And I mean, it's just, and we saw that happening. People saw that happening, but I don't think it wasn't really recognized, and things weren't done about it to help those communities.
And I think that's an important viewpoint, an important concept right there, because any one of these things maybe could have been handled. We'll never know. But when you add
Some of it was handled, depending on where you were.
So,
this is true, and we'll get to that because that's a very true statement. So we'll get to that, and he addresses that. But when you have job loss, when you have no retraining or very poor retraining, when you have low education and you have a school system that begins to start failing people, when you have then put on top of that, people come back from Korea, people come back from Vietnam, they're injured, they're in pain, and then you have big pharma out there peddling drugs, for lack of a better word, and getting people hooked on opioids. And that domino then starts to fall, marriages fall apart, families fall apart, and now it's a snowball rolling downhill. He talks in this book, the two of them talk about how you can help people who, the Naps were not lazy people. They were hard workers. It was just a different kind of work, and they didn't get, they never the coin never fell heads up for them. The coin was always, they were always at the disadvantage. He talks about how, oh, and then the second thing is, yes, Big Pharma with the drugs, but then Reagan's war on drugs and criminalizing. Now you have somebody who's poor, maybe gets in a scuffle with the law, can't pay the bail bond. He gives examples of that, or ends up in jail, and the dominoes continue to fall. If we move on, because time is moving quicker than I expected, part 2, or theme 2 for him, is the common attitude in the United States, for whatever reason, that suffering and these bad situations people find them in are because of their bad choices. And there's very little credence given to the fact that the deck is kind of stacked against them from the beginning. And so that's something to think about. And then, as Roberta was saying, hope. That was the third theme of the book. And there's lots of examples of hope. And that brings us to the role of government versus charity.
Right.
It's another concept. His examples of hope are all on the charitable side. The examples of Debbie, the young girl who was shot in the face by a 13-year-old gang member in New York. And what happens 35 years later, 25 years later? She works to get him out. She works, there's forgiveness in that case. Tani, the little homeless boy playing chess.
Oh, right.
And the graciousness of everyone around him. The fact that the school took an interest. They allowed him to be there even though he lived in a shelter. That was one example. And then Annette Dove down in Arkansas, who she herself didn't have anything, but scraped together enough and organized enough and became the runner of a shelter and a food pantry and a counseling center, and is working on her own. So what do you think that role is between the 1,000 Points of Light and the charities and policy, systemic, governmental sponsored change?
I'm very opinionated on this subject. That's why I'm so involved. I guess my work history and my growing up history, a lot of it is this country's politics. Once we start programs, we don't let them continue to their conclusion. When I was working in welfare, having a program for
Can't
unwed.
hear her.
Can't hear her.
I remember in the 1960s working in a program for unwed teenage mothers, and how we had some of them in college, and all of a sudden somebody came to power and the money was being cut. We had to decide who can keep going and who can't.
Yeah.
It isn't the people on the lower level working with them. And if you think about it, it's a systemic thing of having to change the way, like they can go change Obamacare now if they get to that point. And we've been trying, I was working when Medicaid and SSI and Medicare, Caid and all those were being started. And I remember helping set up some of the eligibility factors, so that there's things that they've got to keep this going. If they stop it, what's going to happen? Rockefeller and Social Security, all those programs that he started. That's the hope. Where was the hope in the 30s?
Leslie, I see your hand up.
I have a personal story
Thanks, Roberta.
that I would like to share. I was born and raised in Cleveland in a middle-class family, and we worked very, very hard so that my sisters and I could go to college. And my younger sister went on and got 3 masters. I always was amazed with that, and was a social worker in Cleveland. Somehow she got you know, we're Jewish, but somehow she got affiliated with the Indian community. And so all the alcohol and all the things that they've gone through. And she got this brilliant idea that she was going to start an organization, which she did. It was called Esteem. I don't know how she got volunteers. She managed to do all of this. She actually won one of the point of award. Yes,
Wow.
exactly. And I'm still amazed. Unfortunately, she has passed away. But she always believed in that, and she helped do. And we really came from nothing, to be honest with you, in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But she believed in it, and I don't even know how she got grants. She was a grant writer that got grants that nobody else did. She brought. Who did she bring to Cleveland?
The presidential.
No, she brought Marion. Can't remember who that is. Marion Williamson to Cleveland. How she got her to come to Cleveland? She organized it, and so I'm a hope believer. I believe in that. I worked for Jewish Community Center it was called the Business Institute for 10 years because I wanted to give back once I got remarried. I had students that came literally from nothing. I had students also that were from Russia. I had African Americans that never had anything, and we retrained them. And I love my job. I got paid very little, but it wasn't important to me. I mean, I know those people are out in the world. We helped to get them jobs. And unfortunately, after about 10, 11 years, for whatever reason, like you were saying, one of you was saying, the funds dried up. And I started out, I had a wonderful teaching job when I first moved here, but I went from that job to this, and I'm so proud of that work because I know that there is hope out there, and there are funds out there, and there are grants out there. Maybe not to the extent that they have in Yamhill, Oregon, but I was hopeful towards the end of the book that they were doing more there. And again, I think you have to believe in hope. I always want to believe in hope because I was a part of helping people that came from nothing, and that's such a big part of me. I still would like to do more, and I'm hoping, I know it's probably naive still, but I'm hoping to believe that there will be more of that. But the poor are not treated right. I mean, even through the program I saw, we were supposed to have social workers and psychologists that help them, which was not my job, which I did anyway, but there was never enough help to go around because we were grant funded, which they all are. And like the one lady said, that either the funds dry up or they were used for something else. Like, as you read in the book, they were used for the prisons. And I have nothing against the prisons. I have a good friend whose daughter teaches in the prisons and teaches English and teaches skills that those people didn't have. And she's beloved, but she loves what she does because she knows she's really helping people that never had a chance in life. Her stories could be in a book as well. So I like to be hopeful that we can continue. Everybody kind of has to continue to do things in their own way. I don't know if it'll ever catch up, but I think we all have to keep trying. Thank you.
Thank you. And actually that is a perfect segue because what you just described is what the Kristofs advocate as creating social policy with a morale of grace. Instead of looking at that 13-year-old little boy who, yes, made a horrible mistake and shot this woman in the face and needed consequences, but didn't necessarily need 999 years, 99 months and 90 days or something for a sentence. And look at how we can help people as opposed to just strictly punish.
Exactly.
So I don't know, I had never heard that, making.
We have such an influence on the punishment aspect.
Right.
And I know I've read about prisons in other countries, and they do a lot more outreach and education and training than we do. We just love to punish people. And especially if they're Black or brown, oh my God, we really love to punish them. And then we wonder why our society is in such a mess when we've incarcerated so many Black and brown men. These families are left without husbands and without fathers. These children grow up with, in terrible situations. And that's why one of the reasons that our country is in such shitty shape now, because we've neglected so much of this stuff. I think there's so much greed and selfishness in some segments of our society that all they want is more money for themselves, and they don't care if their workers are struggling to get by on $7 an hour. I mean, these big corporations, my God, how do you expect people to, I don't know. I mean, it just, I just really fear. I have tried to have hope, but I'm really very fearful for this country because I think we're going, we've let it go for such a long time. I don't know if there's any way we can, that things can change and we can make things better for people, because the problem is so insidious now and so widespread.
Well, it's interesting. The authors also took a different stance. With that, I think in mind, Bev, that greed is here, but according to them, it costs less to be better.
Yes, it does.
So if we can
Yeah.
make that case, if that case can be made, you know, it costs a lot to keep a person in jail. It costs society a lot when families disintegrate, when kids drop out of school and become criminals. There's a cost to that.
Right.
So it might be, it's like Head Start. It's cheaper to help preschoolers
Right.
than to deal with.
But we
So-
never err on that side. We always err on the other side. And
Yeah, let me introduce an idea here as we talk about voting, and yes, everyone needs to vote for sure. But we can also, when we're talking about holding business accountable, we have the opportunity to vote with our wallets.
yes.
So we should be looking at who contributes to social responsibility. We're choosing between 3 or 4 brands. You know, we should check out who's in line with our values. And I think we also, and I don't know how we do this, and this is something I will put out to this group. How do we get the richest companies and men in the world, or people in the world, to believe that they have a role to play? You know, look at the Gates Foundation. They're doing amazing things. They came to that conclusion. How do we get others to use their wealth for the public good? And how do we make that happen, I guess?
Well, and we can look back to history. Electricity didn't come to the entire United States by private donation. It was a government action. It was needed. Today, the equivalent of that is connectivity, the
Mhm.
internet.
Yeah. Computer.
We need, I mean, and yeah, if Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and
Mark Zuckerberg.
there you go, and Bill Gates and the Berkshire Hathaway guy, I can never remember his name.
Warren Buffett.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bloomberg.
Came together, they could easily do this
Yes.
if we wanted to keep it private, but the government could do it too. And that would be an amazing thing. We're talking today about homeschooling, you know, remote learning because of the pandemic. There are kids who don't have the ability to learn from home because they don't have the Wi-Fi, or they don't have the Bluetooth, or they don't have,
Electricity.
well, that too, yeah. All right, we're at a point where we, unfortunately, this time went very, very quickly. I have 3 or 4 more quotes that we needed to talk about, but that's okay. But they end the book with a sense of hope and with 10 things we can do. Because this talk is sponsored by the Holocaust Museum, and we encourage our students and our visitors and all of you to become upstanders and not bystanders. Did any of those 10 things hit home with you? Is there anything, or is there anything in the book that gave you hope, something we can do to affect change? In addition to what Marcy said of voting.
Oh, I think that people are much more interested in volunteering now, I think maybe than they have been in the past. I think there's so many more opportunities. I know I hear about so many groups that are doing so many great things. So I think you just have to kind of check that list out. I read the book a while ago, so I don't really remember in particular, but if anybody wants to do something there, I'm sure there are things you can find. And even if the Holocaust Museum, maybe they could print a list of them, or maybe they could reprint the list from the book and send that out to members of the museum and people that sign up for the wonderful webinars that you do. So if somebody doesn't know how to get in touch and wants to do something, they have the information in front of them.
Good idea. Excellent idea. Good idea.
Anyone else want to
Continuing,
comment on that list?
I don't know the exact list. Can't remember.
Oh, or any way to help.
Any way to help?
You
Yeah.
know.
Just the continuation of things like the Zoom training classes and opening people's eyes.
Mhm.
First thing is we have to open people's eyes to see the problem. If more people read the book, or get someone to read it to them, or get a tape, a disc somehow, or some other equivalent literature, and then get more programs like this and talk to them in
Mhm.
small groups. And
Maybe just set up some programs and have people. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, I'm in another part of the world. I can't get together.
Oh,
with
that's
people.
right, you're in Florida.
I'm in Florida.
Right.
I've retired down here from the New York metropolitan area. And
maybe,
I mean, right down here between our congregation, we're doing a food bank last week with the holidays, and but we're going into the bigger food banks. One of our people is working and talking with us about the migrant shelters, the immigrant shelters, the so-called illegals who, the latest thing is, those of you who might be interested, they're trying to force people to either eat pork-included meals or get food that's old and outdated so that it's rotten food. And this is what's happening with the subcontractors that the government is giving to. There's got to be more oversight of the subcontractor, the so-called do-gooders contractors, because they do things like this. And I know we've been going in there and taking some, not me now because I can't go into those places, I can't be exposed, but members of our congregation are doing that. And we're doing other things like this, and in our own communities. They're giving out food, there's food banks all over the place. And the teachers are volunteering in the schools to help not as tutors and not as teachers, but as friends to the students or foster grandparents, and helping them with things.
And that falls, yeah, thank you, Roberta. And that falls in the category of being a mentor. And it can be mentored to family members, to friends, to neighbors, to anybody. And sometimes it's just recognizing a talent in someone, just recognizing them as a human being, as opposed to the invisible other that it's kind of easy for some of us to overlook. Yeah, to be caring humans.
Yeah. Well, when my husband had dementia, when he was in a daycare, that he was going to daycare, I couldn't go near his programs, but there are times I was teaching knitting or crocheting to a few of the people there who needed something to keep their hands busy, because they're too scattered. They can't get their minds aren't functioning.
Thank you,
That case,
Roberta.
yeah.
Does anyone else have a comment on volunteerism or something that's been particularly meaningful to them, or something that was surprisingly easy to do that they thought might have been harder?
In case anybody's interested, the screen is on across from me and you can see them gathering for the debate.
Oh,
It's
Well,
almost-
we're going to end on time for sure for anyone
Okay.
that's looking to move to that.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
one last question, actually, just because in reading this, I found myself somewhat changed. I knew a lot of this, but it was different seeing it through these eyes. What kind of reactions were any of your ideas confirmed? Were any of your thoughts challenged? Were any of your thoughts changed?
Thought it was interesting to hear about that particular community, because I think very few of us really know that much about a community like Yamhill, Oregon. It's like it was like a different world. And so for me, it was very eye-opening and very sad too, to see how far they had fallen without anybody stepping in to try to help them and try to do something for this whole community.
Mhm.
That was sad. I'm hoping that since he wrote the book, maybe something good came out of it for the residents, but now with the pandemic, who the heck knows?
Well, and he did say at the end, Lori's, you have to unmute yourself, Lori. But at the end, he did say the
Lori,
school
there you go.
money going to the schools for social work. There's more, so things are improving, just not,
Oh, that's right.
you know, not enough.
Lori's unmuted now.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that I see it almost, for me, going the opposite direction. My career was as a social worker, a clinical and a school social worker, because I always felt like it was easier to tackle sort of one-on-one. And obviously being a volunteer at the museum, you know, these are all things that feel sort of within reach. What feels harder for me is how to affect change on the system. And so I think what was eye-opening for me was to think not only about reaching out to the individual, and there were such good examples of that in the book. I thought the Ann Curry example was,
Yeah.
you know, just sort of, because we know who she is, sort of amazing. But I think what I struggle more with is how do we impact the bigger system? I mean, obviously voting, and maybe understanding. You know, without the awareness, do I even know that that needs to be impacted? But I would like to understand better how to contribute to making sort of the bigger change. And I don't have an answer. That's my question.
I think a lot of times we need to step out of our comfort zone and out of our bubble, because I think in the north, you know, the area that we live around the museum, I think we're pretty much in a bubble. We don't really see a lot of hardship. We don't really get to meet too many people of different backgrounds. And I think we need to step out of our bubble. And I think that would really help in a lot of ways. Try to cultivate friendships from people from different groups of the community and different economic groups, different races, different religions. I think understanding other people is a very important part of this.
And to build on what Lori said, we're all focused on the 2020 presidential vote. And yes, that's important. But what's equally important, and maybe in some respects even more important, are who are we voting in on the local level, and what do they stand for, and how do they feel about privatized prisons, or how do they feel about zero tolerance laws, or how do they feel about those kinds of things.
Right.
And then, as Lori mentioned, supporting with our dollars. I mean, vote with your money.
Yeah. I was also going to mention the fair tax amendment, because that would really be helpful to a lot of people that are in a different socioeconomic class than we are. That would be very helpful to them.
Right.
Well, I'm going to close this down. We have 2 minutes to go, and I want to thank everyone for being here, and thank Barbara Jo for moderating, and thank those who participated, and hope that our many listeners also chose to engage with their ears versus their voice, and really also got something out of this program. We continue to work on this One Book, One Museum program. So please feel free to email me. I'll throw my email in the chat. If you have any feedback, I would love to hear from you. A gentle reminder, I'm sure all of you will be there, but Nicholas Kristof and Sheryl WuDunn will be speaking Thursday at 6:30, discussing this book. I think it's such an interesting contrast. I can't wait to hear them talk about these same topics. And I think you all know, but just a reminder, we are open Wednesday through Sunday from 10 to 5. And we urge, if you're going to come, we urge you to reserve your tickets in advance. We have been getting close to sellout, with people really excited to see RBG, and that will be there through January 3rd. Does anyone else? If not, I wish you a great evening. And again, I'm going to put my email in the chat in case anyone wants to drop me a note.
You can type it in.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Barbara Jo.
Oh,
Very
thank you.
interesting.
Thank you for organizing it.
Thank you for
Very well done.
participating.
Bye, everyone.